What would you do if your HOA told you that your perfectly fine mailbox was a violation, and then threatened to fine you for it? When I bought my house, I thought I was finally getting the peaceful, stress-free life I had been working toward. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved as they walked their dogs, where kids rode their bikes down quiet streets, and where everything just felt normal. After years of city noise and crammed apartments, it was exactly what I needed. One of the first things I did after moving in was install a new mailbox. Nothing extravagant, just a sleek, modern design that matched my house. I placed it right next to my driveway, close enough to grab the mail without much effort. Simple. Efficient. No big deal. At least, that's what I thought. A week later, I heard a sharp knock on my door. When I opened it, I was met with a woman in her late 40s, standing stiffly with a clipboard in her hands. Her expression was serious, like she was delivering bad news. "Good morning," she said in a tone that felt anything but friendly. "I'm Karen Whitmore. I'm with the HOA." The way she said it, I was clearly supposed to recognize the authority in her voice. I just nodded. "I noticed your mailbox," she continued, glancing over my shoulder toward the driveway. "It's not compliant with community regulations. You'll need to move it." I blinked. "Move it?" She sighed, like I was a child struggling with basic instructions. "Yes. It's too far back from the curb. HOA regulations require all mailboxes to be positioned exactly 20 inches from the street. Yours is further." I turned, looking at the mailbox. It was maybe a few inches off from whatever invisible line she had in her head. It wasn't blocking anything. It wasn't in the way. It was just there. I turned back to her. "I don't see the problem." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The problem is, it doesn't follow the rules." That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't about the mailbox. This was about control. And I wasn't about to back down. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe Karen would huff and puff, send an official-looking letter, and then move on to harass someone else about the color of their flower pots. But I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go. 2 days after our conversation, I found a crisp white envelope in my mailbox. The HOA logo was stamped at the top, bold and intimidating, as if it carried the weight of the law itself. The letter inside was short and to the point: "Failure to comply with mailbox placement regulations will result in a fine of $50 per day until corrected." I let out a sharp laugh. $50 a day? For a mailbox? I decided to do my homework before responding. I spent the evening poring over the HOA handbook, highlighting every section related to mailbox placement. Nowhere did it state anything about a mandatory 20-inch distance from the curb. The closest thing I could find was a vague sentence about community aesthetics and alignment with neighborhood standards. It was just another excuse for Karen to wield power over minor, insignificant details. So, I ignored the letter. The next morning, I woke up, stretched, and went outside to grab the newspaper, only to find my mailbox missing. For a moment, I just stared at the empty patch of grass where it had stood the night before, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Then I looked around and spotted it, reinstalled closer to the curb, tilted slightly, as if the job had been done in a hurry. My stomach tightened. There was no way this was some random act of vandalism. I stormed inside, pulled up my security camera footage, and there it was, clear as day, Karen and 2 HOA board members, sneaking onto my property in the dead of night, digging up my mailbox, and moving it. I gritted my teeth. They had trespassed onto my property and physically altered it without my permission. That had to be illegal, right? I wasn't going to let this slide. I spent the next hour reinstalling the mailbox back in its original position, taking pictures for documentation. Then, I printed out a copy of the HOA rules, the same rules that didn't mention any required mailbox distance. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. By the afternoon, I saw her again, standing across the street, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. I didn't give her the satisfaction of looking her way. Later that evening, another envelope appeared on my doorstep. This time, it wasn't just a mailbox violation, it was 3 separate HOA fines. $100 for an overgrown lawn, I had mowed it 2 days ago. $75 for a trash can left out too long, I had taken it in right after the garbage truck passed. $150 for a non-compliant house color, I had never repainted it. I clenched the paper in my hands. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This was a personal attack. The next morning, I decided to confront Karen directly. I walked over to her house and knocked. She opened the door with a knowing smirk, leaning casually against the frame like she'd been expecting me. "Let me guess," she said, feigning innocence. "You got your HOA notices?" I held up the stack of papers. "Cut the crap, Karen. My lawn is fine. My trash cans were never out of place. And you know damn well my house has been the same color since I moved in." She let out a small sigh, shaking her head like I was being unreasonable. "Mark, the HOA has rules. If you just cooperated like everyone else, you wouldn't have to deal with all this." I could feel my blood boiling. "You trespassed on my property. You moved my mailbox without my consent. That's illegal, Karen." Her smirk didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. "Oh, I don't know about that. We were simply enforcing the guidelines. And besides," she tilted her head, her voice lowering as if she were sharing a secret. "You really think anyone is going to take your side over the HOAs?" It was in that moment I realized exactly what I was dealing with. Karen wasn't just an annoying neighbor with too much time on her hands, she was a bully. But she had underestimated me. I took a step back, my anger hardening into something sharper. "We'll see about that." As I walked away, I could still feel her eyes on me, like a predator watching its prey. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to win. The next morning, I stepped outside expecting another ridiculous HOA letter, but instead, I found something even worse. I wasn't getting any mail at all. At first, I thought maybe it was a fluke. A delay. A new mail carrier unfamiliar with the route. But after 3 days without a single letter, package, or even a flyer, I started to suspect something was wrong. I called the post office, expecting a simple explanation. Instead, what I got made my jaw clench. "Oh, yes," the postal worker said over the phone, sounding apologetic. "Your address has been flagged for a mail obstruction issue. The HOA reported that your mailbox wasn't compliant, so we had to place a temporary hold on delivery." I nearly dropped my phone. Karen had gone to the post office and tried to cut off my mail. I forced myself to stay calm. "So what do I need to do to get my mail reinstated?" "Well, normally, you'd have to resolve the issue with your HOA first, but if you can prove your mailbox is compliant, I can override the hold." I drove straight to the post office, armed with photos of my mailbox, a copy of the HOA handbook, and a written complaint of harassment. It took some back and forth, but eventually, they agreed. Karen had no right to interfere with my mail. By the end of the day, the hold was lifted, and my deliveries resumed. I was furious, but I was also more determined than ever. If Karen thought she could bully me into submission, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. But she wasn't finished. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, my stomach twisted. A police officer stood on my porch. And next to him, looking smug and self-satisfied, was Karen. "Good afternoon," the officer said, his expression neutral but his tone firm. "We received a complaint of harassment from Ms. Whitmore here. She claims you've been acting aggressively toward her." I let out a sharp breath, barely keeping my temper in check. Excuse me? She's the one harassing me. She's moved my mailbox without permission, reported fake HOA violations, and even got my mail delivery shut down. And now she's wasting your time with a false police report. The officer turned to Karen. Ma'am, do you have any evidence of harassment? Karen sighed dramatically, as if she were exhausted by the situation. Officer, I don't feel safe in my own neighborhood anymore. He's been confronting me, staring at me, and, she hesitated for effect, then lowered her voice, I'm worried about what he might do next. I could see what she was doing. She was trying to paint herself as the victim. She wasn't just being annoying anymore, she was playing the system. I crossed my arms. Check my security cameras. They'll show exactly what's been happening. The officer studied me for a moment, then gave Karen a hard look. Ma'am, unless you have proof that a crime was committed, there's nothing I can do here. Karen's face twitched slightly, but she recovered quickly. I just wanted a record of my concerns, she said, shifting her posture into one of innocence. You never know what might happen. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from snapping at her. She was laying the groundwork for future complaints. This was her warning shot. After the officer left, I stood in my doorway, staring after Karen as she walked away with that same smug smirk. And then the next day, I found an eviction notice taped to my door. For a split second, my stomach dropped. I thought the HOA had somehow found a way to kick me out. But when I pulled the paper off the door and looked at it closely, I realized something: it was fake. There was no official letterhead. The formatting was all wrong. And buried at the bottom, in small print, was something that made my blood boil. Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in further action. You have 30 days to vacate. This wasn't a real eviction notice. This was a scare tactic. Karen had printed out a fake legal document and posted it on my door, hoping I'd panic. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to remain calm. That was it. That was the final straw. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to take her down. I didn't waste any time. Karen had crossed a line, and now it was time to hit back where it hurt. I started by documenting everything. I took photos of the fake eviction notice, saved screenshots of every HOA violation I had received, and compiled the security footage of Karen trespassing onto my property to move my mailbox. But I needed more. If I wanted to take her down, I had to prove she was abusing her power. That's when I decided to talk to my neighbors. At first, people were hesitant. No one wanted to publicly go against Karen or the HOA, but once I explained what had been happening to me, the floodgates opened. Mr. Jameson, a retired veteran down the street, shook his head when I told him about my mailbox battle. She tried the same thing with me last year. Said my flagpole was too tall and didn't meet HOA regulations. Fined me for 6 months straight until I finally proved she made the rule up herself. A young couple, Matt and Jessica, shared that Karen had fined them for having a non-approved garden hose. Their actual crime? Buying a blue one instead of a beige one. Then there was Linda, who got fined for having excessive holiday decorations. She had put up one inflatable snowman for Christmas. Karen had been doing this for years. The fines, the fake violations, the intimidation, it was a pattern. And the worst part? She had personally benefited from it. Matt, the young husband, lowered his voice when he told me what he had discovered. I looked into HOA financial records last year. The board controls all the fines we pay, and guess who manages the HOA's discretionary spending? I already knew the answer. Karen. That was my smoking gun. I spent the next few days compiling a case against her. I gathered statements from multiple neighbors, copies of unfair violation notices, and even financial reports showing suspicious expenses. It was all there: misuse of HOA funds, harassment, and corruption. But I needed one final push. I waited for Karen to show up at my house again. I knew she would. She thrived on control, and she hadn't seen me crack yet. She needed to push one last time. Sure enough, 3 days later, she arrived, this time with 2 other HOA board members in tow. They stood at the foot of my driveway, clipboards in hand, smug as ever. "You've had your warnings," Karen said, voice sharp. "The HOA is officially taking action. If you don't move the mailbox immediately and pay your outstanding fines, we will file legal action against you." I folded my arms, unmoved. "Actually, Karen, I think it's time we talk about your legal trouble." Her face twitched slightly, but she kept her fake confidence intact. "Excuse me?" I pulled a thick envelope from my back pocket and tossed it onto her clipboard. "That's a formal complaint being sent to the HOA Oversight Committee and the County Fraud Division. Turns out, fining people for made-up rules while skimming money off the top for administrative expenses is illegal." "Who knew?" One of the other board members, a middle-aged man who looked increasingly uncomfortable, flipped through the papers. His face paled. "Karen, is this real?" Karen snatched the documents from him, scanning them quickly. Her confidence wavered for the first time. This is ridiculous." I took a step closer, dropping my voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your days of bullying this neighborhood are over." She tried to respond, but I wasn't listening anymore. I turned to the 2 board members. "You might want to distance yourselves. HOA fraud cases don't end well." They didn't argue. In fact, they looked ready to run. Karen, however, stood frozen in place, gripping the papers so tightly her knuckles turned white. For the first time, she had no control. And I made sure she knew it. "See you at the next HOA meeting, Karen." Then I walked away, leaving her standing in the driveway, silent for the first time since this entire nightmare began. The fallout happened fast. Within a week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, and for the first time, the neighborhood showed up in full force. The whispers about Karen's abuse of power had spread, and now people were angry. The board, desperate to distance itself from her, announced that a third-party audit would be conducted on all HOA finances. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming the accusations were lies and misunderstandings, but no one was buying it. The moment the audit report came back, it was over. Thousands of dollars in administrative expenses were unaccounted for. She had been using our HOA dues to cover things like spa visits, expensive dinners, and even a luxury weekend getaway. The HOA immediately removed her from the board, issued an apology to the community, and wiped every single one of my bogus fines. They also revised the rulebook to prevent board members from enforcing unwritten policies. Karen, humiliated and cornered, put her house up for sale and moved out within the month. No farewell, no final power play, just a for sale sign in the yard and a moving truck backing into her driveway. The last time I saw her, she didn't even look at me. She knew she had lost. And my mailbox? It's still exactly where I put it. Untouched. Unmoved. For the first time since moving in, I could finally enjoy my home without HOA harassment. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. The best part? Some of the same neighbors who had been too afraid to stand up before started pushing for more transparency and accountability within the HOA. The board was forced to listen. Winning this fight wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about proving that HOAs don't have unchecked power. That just because someone like Karen wants control, doesn't mean they deserve it. Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen who thought they could do whatever they wanted? How did it end for you? Share your story, I'd love to hear how you fought back.